So our next presentation is a bibliometric analysis of OER research in higher education, presented by Rachel Chandler. Rachel is a science and data visualization librarian at Georgia State University. She has a background in medical and scientific illustration and loves all things related to science, information, and art. Take it away, Rachel.
Okay, can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction, Marianne. So as Marianne said, this is a bibliometric study of open educational resources, open textbooks, and academic librarianship. That really long name is because this is actually my master's research project for my master's in library and information science, which I'm getting from the University of Southern Mississippi. And I'm also the science and data visualization librarian here at GSU. And when I found out that we were doing this conference and that it happens to relate to my master's research, I thought this could be a really great opportunity. I will hopefully be receiving my MLS in May with this, so I'm really excited to present it to you all. So it's going to be a little bit different, but just to recap, hopefully everybody knows what open educational resources are. In my study, I was using this particular definition as established by the UNESCO Forum on the Impact of Open Courseware for Higher Education, which was in 2002. So, it's the open provision of educational resources for use and adaptation by community for non-commercial purposes. And then kind of just taking that and expanding it, with newer technology. It's also looking at things like massive open online courses, public domain materials, different kinds of licenses, and stuff like that. But in the vein of what the topic of this conference is about, student success, I was really interested in looking at OERs and open textbooks and academic librarianship, kind of just the, the intersection of all my interests. And in particular, I found this sort of statistic from the Education Data Initiative to be really striking, and what kind of inspired me when I first was looking at what I wanted to do for my master's research, that the average full-time in-state undergraduate student at a four-year public university pays $1,226 for books and supplies in one academic year. And those same students, when surveyed, 11% of them said that they skipped meals to be able to afford course materials in books. And so I just found that to be striking, and that's a lot of money. And so clearly this is something that is hindering student success and creating barriers to education, especially from students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and first generation college students. And I know from some of the work that Marianne and Charlene have been doing, surveying students, frequently students here at GSU, it's something that they talk a lot about, how expensive that textbooks are and how much of a hindrance that is. And so, as we all know, the reason we're here today is research on and implementation of open educational practices is one way to facilitate a more equitable environment for students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Things like the Open Education Week that we're doing, Charlie and I are going to be tabling next week for that, but just open educational resources in general, and I think specifically open textbooks, encourage innovation in higher education and make it more accessible for everyone. And a little more background in this study, I'm also really interested about the intersection between libraries and OERs. So as we all know, the mission of the OER movement is pretty well aligned with the mission of academic libraries. They both have democratic principles about, information and accessibility of resources. OER initiatives are often led by libraries, like, here at GSU, Charlene and Marianne doing stuff with OpenStax. And just at a library, an OER initiative often means like the library hosting the OERs, the library promoting OERs, and then a big part of it, librarian-led training for using OERs, which I think can really help faculty and help students know how to use them and faculty know how to implement them in their classes. And then also, something I thought was really interesting, a study that I came across in doing my research from Smith and Lee in 2017, they kind of identified the roles of academic librarians in the OER movement. So all these different things, I found them very similar to kind of a subject librarian's roles with the non-OER materials in a library, collection. And then I found that, two common strategies that academic libraries have for facilitating OER initiatives is to have a dedicated OER librarian or to implement OERs with subject librarians' expertise and establish faculty relationships, which is really interesting. But if you look at, these like 7 roles and responsibilities on top of what we already do as subject librarians, which is a pretty big workload, it's kind of a lot. So what I came across is I think there needs to be more quantitative and qualitative studies about academic libraries and OERs. And then I was also really interested in my master's research at looking at, open textbooks as a specific subset of OERs. I know in particular, when I'm talking about the high financial burden faced by college students, a big part of that, in addition to coming from the cost of tuition, is coming from the cost of textbooks, which in this 2015 study, they actually said sometimes textbooks can even approach or surpass the cost of tuition, which, that's pretty bad. And so that was something that I really wanted to look at. And then in addition, I found that I think open textbooks in particular, it's very natural that they would be a form of OERs used in higher education. And in studies like this one in 2021, in addition to it seeming that the library be the natural place to host OERs, a lot of these authors found that a lot of the students, that was also their preferred access point. It made sense for the students to be able to find the OER, in this case, digital textbooks in their library. But I also found in doing my research, a lot of institutional awards and sponsorships don't favor open textbooks as library resources. And then libraries advocating for and hosting open textbooks can, conflict with the university bookstore or other commercial interests of universities, which is why I felt there needed to be some more research on this topic in general. And then the last thing I'll just say about OERs and open textbooks is this study from Mishra and the other authors in 2002 was one that I sort of built my research methodology around. It was a very big bibliometric analysis of peer-reviewed publications about open education. And they identified, as listed here, these subtopics of OER research: open textbooks, open online courses, open courseware, open source software, and open social learning. And the thing that really inspired my particular focus in the study was that they found that open textbooks are declining in popularity as a research topic, which is something that I found to be concerning because all of these other topics of OER research, like open social learning, replacing that with open textbooks does not negate the cost of open textbooks. So I'm kind of hoping that it will not be declining as a research topic. And I was hoping to find that it wasn't in higher education, at least. And so in my study, this is sort of the purpose of my research study, is I wanted to track the publication of scholarly literature on OERs in higher education, and maybe also pull out some information about the open textbooks in that publication of scholarly literature. And I wanted to identify the research topics. And then in particular, I wanted to see the productivity of scholarship in the LIS, Library and Information Science field about OERs. So I was hoping to see that there was at least like a little bit of distinctive scholarship from the LIS community coming from there. So these were my research questions, and they had to be very long and specific for my master's research project. But basically what I was looking at is I created a search string, which I'll show you in a bit, that's about OERs in higher education to find a certain amount of articles. And I wanted to know, of all these articles, how many were published per year, what were the top journals that were publishing these articles, who were the top authors that are publishing on this topic. I wanted to see if I could see of those top authors as well, how many of them were librarians, if I could ascertain that information. And then what are the top keywords on these articles, so I could see kind of topics, and then seeing if any of those top keywords were about open textbooks and libraries, and how many were. And then I also wanted to see what are the most highly cited articles on this topic, and see if any of those really highly cited articles also were about textbooks or libraries. So that brings me to my methodology, which I formulated based on that study that I talked about earlier from Mishra 2020. I'll have a reference for that at the end. But basically, I just wanted to be able to use a methodology to identify those core authors I was saying and the core journals, the ones that are publishing the most and making sort of the scholarly impact in OER research, and kind of define what was happening. So just to kind of pause and slow down a little bit. So bibliometrics, this word that I keep saying, it's a quantitative research method often used in library and information science, but also often used in scientific research. There's a particular subset of bibliometrics called scientometrics that measures scientific research production. But basically, you can kind of think of it, you can break down the word biblio, meaning, books, publications, and metrics, meaning counting or measuring. So this is the official definition of it, but it's basically you're looking at the amount of publications about a certain topic, so you can kind of see its development over time, and you can see who and what is influential, and kind of trace it like that, which is what I wanted to be able to do with OERs, and specifically OERs in higher education. So this is the really, really basic breakdown of my methods. So I knew I wanted to search for articles in Web of Science as the database, and then I exported all of my search results after making a really good search string to EndNote, and that's where I could look for duplicate articles, because Web of Science pulls from a lot of different databases and citation indexes. So I wanted to make sure there were no duplicate articles, which, spoiler, there were not, which was good. And then I also exported all of the records and their metadata from Web of Science and used this program called Bibliometrics to be able to do the bibliometric mapping. Okay, so why did I use Web of Science? Well, I come from a science background personally, so I really like using Web of Science, but also it's just a premier citation database for scholarly publications. It has a lot of, it draws records from high impact journals and conference proceedings. It's used very frequently for bibliometric analysis, which I found when I was conducting my review of the literature. And, that's because it has this high quality indexing, and then it has citation reporting and reference tracing, which is really important for bibliometric mapping the metadata from that. And then I also knew that despite that it's Web of Science, it does draw very heavily from the social sciences citation index and the arts and humanities citation index, which I knew were likely to capture a lot of publications in the education and LIS fields, which I knew that most of these publications were likely to come from those fields. And in addition, Web of Science is one of the main databases that works with this particular program, which this citation on the slide is by the scientists that actually developed this bibliometrics program. But basically, it's a package for R. It's an open source data analysis program designed specifically for bibliometric data visualization and mapping. As I said before, it's a little bit more designed for looking at scientific research and publications, but it really works for any type of publication. And Web of Science is actually their preferred database to use because of all of the particular type of metadata that comes with each of the articles when you download the records. And then another reason I wanted to use it is because it has a user-friendly web application. So I didn't have to do any of the coding or anything in R, but it made it really easy to use and to kind of trace a lot of stuff. So this was my search strategy. I've kind of broken up the search terms a little bit and highlighted them in different colors so you can see exactly sort of how I did it. But really these weren't, all of this was together in one large string except for the publication year. So in the purple up here, the first thing I'm doing is the TS equals, that's actually telling what field for Web of Science to search in, and it's searching in the topic field. And their topic field in the Web of Science database searches in the titles, abstracts, author keywords, and keyword plus fields for search terms. And so if keyword plus doesn't sound familiar, so Web of Science, unlike PubMed, some of the other databases, it doesn't have controlled vocabulary or subject terms, but it has this keyword plus field where it generates keywords and index terms automatically from the titles of cited articles. So I knew I wanted to search in those as well. And so this first purple part of the search string, I'm trying to capture, iterations of the words of OERs and open education. Initially, I had thought about just doing open textbook, but I found that there really wasn't enough articles that it was finding that way. And I did the same thing searching in the TS field in green, and this is trying to capture, anything related to higher education, academic, college. I have truncated for university, so it would get universities and university. But specifically, a lot of the other bibliometric studies I looked at, they didn't have this higher education component. And that's why I really wanted to kind of specify it down to that, because there are open educational resource initiatives in, public libraries and things like that. And then the last one was that I wanted to do a document type in the search string too, so that's the DT. And I wanted to have articles, proceedings, papers, and reviews. So that kind of would just exclude things like book chapters. I wanted to have scholarly publications, but not limit it to peer review publications, because sometimes case studies can be non-peer reviewed publications. And I knew I wanted to have case studies be included in the documents that were returned. And then just the last part of my search strategy so all of this is in the advanced search function for Web of Science. I wanted to take the publication year and limit it based on from 2002, because that is when the term open educational resources was coined, as I talked about earlier. And so I didn't think it would be beneficial to search the scholarly literature before that. And then I just wanted to take it up until the very end of 2022, because it's the first full year to date. So limiting that and also excluding early access articles and things like that were published in 2022, but not officially published until 2023. So just a couple more notes on my methodology. The search string, as I was searched in Web of Science in the advanced field, I did not limit the language to English, because I know there's a lot of, global scholarly publication on OERs. And then I didn't limit the articles to being peer reviewed. And then once I did the search results, I exported those to both EndNote and Bibliometrics to be able to look at all those different things. And then another aspect of one of my research questions, when I found these core authors, I wanted to know about their occupations to see if I could determine if any of them were academic librarians. And I did that because with Web of Science, they have a record for each of the authors and the articles, and then it also connected to their ORCID IDs. So I was able to ascertain some information from that. But there are some important limitations with this methodology is, I did only use Web of Science, which could have resulted in articles being left out. There could be issues with my specific search string that maybe retrieved irrelevant results or missed some relevant results. And then, kind of the assumption that this study is based on, that these keywords can tell me topics of articles, because, there are like 1,000 articles in the results, so I couldn't read each of them. And then also assuming this method of using Web of Science author records and ORCID IDs was correct to be able to determine authors' occupations. Okay, so that brings me to my results and what I found using this methodology. Mainly, I was able to ascertain the authors that published the most, the journals that published the most, and the most frequent keywords. So here's the graphs for my first research question, how many scholarly articles about this were published in this time period. I found about 1,212 articles published from 2002 to 2022. The lowest number of articles published in a given year was in 2004 and 2007, as you can see up here, where there were no articles published on the topic. And then the most was definitely in 2019, when there were 167. And so on the right, you can see this figure shows like the change in publication over time. So there's like a steady increase, especially, starting around like 2014 is a really dramatic increase. And then a big peak from 2018 to 2020, where there's a slight decrease. But other than that, their annual growth rate of publications was about 26%. So I thought this was really interesting, especially the small decrease after the peak, because as we all know, that's corresponding to the years of the pandemic. So I thought that was very interesting. And my second question, which journals are publishing the most? I found there's 612 different journals, including conference proceedings, that published articles on the topic. The most prolific, as you can see in this graph, was definitely the International Review of Research in Open and Distributed Learning. They had 95 publications, which is 7.8% of the total. And then that's followed by the journal Open Praxis, which had 34 of the total publications, about 2.8%. So it's interesting, those are both journals with open in the title. They kind of have a focus on open education. So it's not surprising that they would be publishing the most. Another thing I'll mention that's important to bibliometrics is there's a law called Bradford's Law that a few core journals publish the most on a single topic. And I found that this distribution of publication in the journals actually did adhere to that. There were only 34 journals that published the most on the topic. And then about 398 journals only published one article on the topic. So it kind of shows diminishing returns exemplified by the law. So I pulled out from that set of information the journals that were specifically about, library and information science. So you can see those here. There are 18 LIS journals that publish only about 41 of the total publications. So it's about 2% of the total journals that they're representing and 3.2% of the total published articles. So, not a lot. And then by far of the specific library journals, the Journal of Academic Librarianship had the most with 8 publications. So then I looked at, who are the top authors that are publishing about that, and then I found that there were 2,824 authors. The most prolific is this one up at the top. His name is D. Burgos, and he had 19 publications, or 1.6% of the total. And then another law that's important in bibliometrics is Latkas Law, which states that most authors only publish once on a given subject, which I did find that to be consistent. Of these 2,824 authors, 2,417 of them only published once on the topic. And so of these authors, I kind of tried to draw a little more of their information. I was not able to ascertain that any of them were academic librarians. Most of them were professors or former professors. And then with their Web of Science records, their areas of focus and research were primarily education, and then also computer science, which kind of makes sense about information science and information technology. So you can see those there. And then I wanted to look at what the most frequent keywords of all these articles were. And so with Bibliometrics and Web of Science, I was able to look at these 2 different types of keywords, which are authors keywords, which are the ones that the authors are putting in themselves. They have any sort of option. They can use previously created authors keywords or create their own keywords. And then there's the keyword plus ones. So those, again, are index terms automatically generated from the titles of cited articles by Web of Science. So those are also kind of interesting because you're really seeing what words appear very frequently in the titles as compared to what words the authors are choosing as their own keywords. But these are all of them. So you can see, OER, Open Educational Resources, Open Education are really popular, as are Massive Open Online Courses, the abbreviation for that. So this is the most frequently used authors keywords. There are about 2,807 different authors keywords. The most popular was by far Open Educational Resources, which was used 410 times, which makes a lot of sense, but that was used, double the amount of time from the next most frequent keyword, Open Education. And then you can see up in there, Open Textbooks was used 35 times. So I think it was like number 14 in the top 20, which I thought was really interesting, but it was used a lot less than, Massive Open Online Courses, and the 2 abbreviations for that, which were used 53 and 46 times. The most frequent keyword plus keywords, which again are automatically generated from the titles of cited articles. There was about 547 different keywords, and the most popular, as you can see up here, are adoption and OER, which are both used 39 times, which kind of makes sense. Those are probably being used in a title like adoption of OER, adoption of OER resources. So that's not surprising to see. As you can see in these top keywords, there are not any for textbooks or libraries. And so I'll get to that in just a second, but there's not that in the top 20. So then these are, I pulled out from both the authors keywords on the left and the keyword plus on the right, any keywords about textbooks or open textbooks. There were 33 authors keywords related to that, used about 110 times, so that's pretty good. And then, as I said before, open textbooks was used 35 times and was in those top 20 most frequently used. Whereas there were only about 6 keyword plus ones related to textbooks and open textbooks, and they were only used about 25 times. So not as frequently, but textbook is by far the most common keyword plus about textbooks. And then I did the same thing, but with keywords about libraries, and there were even less frequently used and less of them than the ones about open textbooks, although there were more author keywords like related to libraries. There are 28 authors keywords related to libraries, used 61 times. The most popular, as you can see, is academic libraries, which was used 19 times. And then there's only about 6 keyword plus ones related to libraries, and the most popular is library. Those only used 3 times. You can see most of them are only used once. So clearly libraries and library are not being used in the titles of these articles. And another thing that I just wanted to look at that I thought was interesting is Web of Science attaches a subject category to each record. And so I did the most frequently used, which by far with 744 times is education and educational research. But you know, library and information and library science was the 4th most commonly used, and they can have more than one. So it was at least used like 102 times. So it's somewhat present in terms of the subjects of articles as determined by Web of Science. And then I also wanted to look at the most highly cited published articles, and this is globally cited, so which ones have the highest citation impact, not of the articles in the study, just in general. And the most highly cited article was this one by Hodges in 2021, which was actually called Shift to Digital Perspectives on Hilton 2016 from the Perspectives of Practice. So interestingly, this top article that was cited 278 times is actually about the 2nd most highly cited article, which was cited 176 times. But that 2nd most highly cited article is Open Educational Resources and College Textbook Choices, a review of research on efficacy and perceptions. So, you know, one of them is an article about college textbooks and OERs, and one is an article about college textbooks and OERs. So I thought that was interesting. Of these top 20 most highly cited articles, none are in explicitly library and information science journals. And then all of these are categorized in the subject category of education and educational research. And then 2 of them have an additional category, but it's for computer science, not for library and information science. And so I pulled out of those 20 highly cited articles, here are the ones with keywords related to open textbooks. There were not any with keywords related to libraries. And so I bolded there. It's pretty much just either using the author's keyword of textbooks, open textbooks, or electronic textbooks. And then very interestingly, you know, of these top highly cited articles that do talk about textbooks and open textbooks, 3 of them are by the same author, J. Hilton. I thought that was interesting. And then they're mostly in these 2 journals, which again are about education technology and open learning. Okay, so since I'm getting right around the time where I need to be done, my conclusions that I sort of found after doing all of this, the study, as I said, examined 1,212 articles about OERs in higher education that were published in this 20-year time span starting in 2002. And then I did find an increase in publications on this topic over time, which is not a surprise. And then although there was a slight decrease in the number of publications in the last 3 years, 75% of the total publications on this topic were published in the last 6 years. So clearly it's a vital area and a growing area of research. And then the fields represented by the core journals were all education and computer science. Only 2.9% of the journals of the sampled articles were LAS specific, and they only published 41 of the articles. I don't think that's necessarily too surprising because academic librarianship does overlap a lot with the field of education. So, you know, academic librarians or research being done in academic libraries could be being published in education journals. And then I thought it was very interesting that a specific topic like open textbooks was so highly present in the top 20 authors keywords when a lot of those keywords were really broad topics like OER or learning or distance learning. I found that I feel like it could be a niche aspect of OER research that authors might continue to publish about, but not with, you know, extremely exceptional productivity. And then, you know, as that previous study I talked about found, research about open textbooks could be declining, or it could be like some other studies I read where institutions don't want to sponsor OERs as permanently funded resources or open textbooks as library resources. So maybe that could mean less incentive to publish about open textbooks or as a subtopic. So library-related keywords also comprise only about 1% of both types of keywords, and none were present in really frequently used keywords or as keywords for the most highly cited articles. This could indicate low productivity in research on OERs and higher educations in the LIS field, Maybe academic librarians may implement OERs in their libraries, but not publish about them. Or as some of the other studies suggested, maybe academic librarians are unable to add OER initiatives and research to their workload because it's already a lot in their workload. Or there could be more librarians as authors of articles on this topic than I was able to ascertain just looking at the top 20. And then I did think it was interesting that the subject category of information and library science was like the fourth most frequent subject category for the articles. And so this could support that there is like less library specific research because of the multidisciplinary nature of academic librarianship, which does overlap with education, academic, but it also overlaps with computer science, particularly in information science and technology, which is often the way these OERs are implemented. Or it could represent how libraries are just one vehicle for implementing OERs at any academic institution, and then could maybe just be a smaller area of research on this topic because of that. Some previous studies I read did find that institutional teaching and learning centers often do evenly share sponsorship of OER initiatives with libraries. So I think the data in this study does support that most productivity of research on this topic is in the field of education, which is unsurprising, but I did find that there was a small presence of library scholarship on the topic, but these results only provide a glimpse into the publication data of OERs in higher education in the LIS field. And I hope that there will be more bibliometric studies about this in the future, especially as more years can be added. And then in particular, I found that very interesting, that decrease in publications around the time of the pandemic. So I think that could be really interesting for a future study. But I just hope in general there'll be more studies, more quantitative and qualitative analyses of OER initiatives in libraries. So if anyone has any questions, I'm available. I only went 1 minute over my time, which is pretty good.
We do have a few in the chat. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really great.
Thanks, Hallie.
Okay. Yeah, so Jessica was asking that, or maybe observing, which I completely agree with, that it was interesting that there wasn't a peak in publishing resources developed for online teaching during COVID. So that, and also expressing some surprise that the Journal of Microbiology and Biology Education did not have more.
Yeah,
and then a question, did QuebSub or Course Source come up? So I guess maybe first comment on the lack of a peak during COVID.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting as well. But, I think it could be corresponding to maybe less people were publishing, maybe they were doing research and implementing the initiatives during COVID. Like in these next couple of years, it's going to go back up, the number of publications, because this would be measuring the year that the actual article was published, not necessarily the year that the research was done. But I would have also guessed that there would be a lot of these initiatives at least being tried out during the pandemic.
And then any comments about the Journal of Microbiology and Biology Education not having more?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting as well. A lot of those top journals, they were not even just education focused. It was that they were all open education journals, which makes like a lot of sense. Like they're they're very broad in their topics. Even looking at LIS journals, like that is a specific kind of field. So I did find that journals that had like a specific focus were lower in the number of publications, I think, than just like the journals with big broad topics.
Yeah, thank you. And then Martha commented that she was surprised that free, low cost, or open source didn't come up as terms.
Yeah, it's really, really surprising. I think, the most commonly used authors term, at least, was just the term open educational resources itself. And so I think it could be just that there's like the author, you can put any sort of author keyword term in there that you want. And so I found there's like a lot of variations even between specific terms, like even just having an S on the end of something and then a not, those would be counted as two different terms. So that is really interesting with you. I think it's just because there's so many and there's not like a lot of restrictions on what you can use as an author keyword.
Thank you. And then, yeah, looks like Mary Ann just commented that she suspects there's also that lag in between activity and publication. Jessica was digging through the JMBE archives and mentioned that there's a sad lack of specific OER articles. QUBES and Course Source are a key for OER resources. I'm not exactly sure what that means. This is all pretty new to me. But
well, I think also, there could have been ones like I put specifically it had to have in the search terms also something about higher ed with my terms about that in addition to having something about OERs, because I kind of wanted to look at that specifically without having to go through every single article myself and make sure it was about higher ed. So that could be a reason, if those articles published in that journal didn't have keywords or terms about OERs and higher education in the titles or abstracts or keywords, then it wouldn't have been pulled out for this particular sample. And I'll also put up, these are the references of the particular studies that I was referencing, just in case anybody needs them. The first one is specifically the publication about this Bibliometrics, this tool for bibliometric mapping that I thought was really great and really easy to use, especially their web interface.
Rachel, this is Marianne. I think it's great that you found anything at all. Because I looked sort of in a preliminary way. I was going to do some kind of citation study about libraries and OER in the literature, and I used Google Scholar, and I just kind of came up with zero. Like
Oh, wow.
there were publications about OERs, but they didn't cite each other. That's what I was hoping to do the analysis on. Nothing was citing anything else. So the few publications I found didn't cite each other. And I just find it really interesting because librarians have been at the forefront of advocacy for OER for, since 2013 and 14. So I think the fact that you found something is a progress.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm happy to send you, I can send you my records of these articles because there are a lot, I think.
Okay.
But I found that because I found it similarly frustrating, like it was really hard to get, librarians publishing or librarianship kind of pulled out from this group of articles. I thought that was an interesting challenge.
Yes.